Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz, a conversationalist. We all know a dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company creates a way to capture smart and important conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Melissa Rinehart, who is the Executive Director of Wellspring Interfaith Social Services. Welcome.
Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. So, before we get into Wellspring and before we get into everything, we've got to start with this idea of you being a cultural anthropologist. So, first of all, let's start with what does it mean to be a cultural anthropologist?
I get that question a lot, and even more so, why are you running a nonprofit? For me, it makes perfect sense. My training is a social scientist, so I observe. I talk to people who are different and live their lives differently than me, and look for connections and things like that. So
that sounds like a journalist.
It is, but we there's scientific rigor to what folks like me do.
Right.
So, we could spend a year or more studying a group of people or a certain cultural practice, and then we go through that data and then we write about it.
Right.
And
you have a PhD.
Yes, I do.
And so your area of expertise is the Native American Studies.
Yes.
And you looked at the tribes of the Eastern Woodlands and the Miami who are indigenous to this area.
Correct.
So what are some of the things that we can learn from those societies, or things that you think would be important that they did or do that would help us in the world that we live in today?
Well, I think, specifically for Fort Wayne is that so many of my Miami friends, they still live in this region. They still live along the river valleys of central Indiana, and that they have worked really hard and continue to work really hard at reclaiming their language. That is a pretty Herculean effort to revitalize a dormant language that hasn't been spoken in decades.
And Purdue has a huge effort here about indigenous languages.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah.
And I know they've worked with the Miami. And I believe the gentleman, Daryl Baldwin, is going to be doing a presentation at the History Center about that, what that's looked like. So, we have a lot of Indian heritage here, but I think the number one thing I try to tell people is that indigenous peoples are still living here.
Right. So one of my questions is most of the time when you hear about Native Americans or indigenous people, they get like reservation, they get land, and then they can build their culture in a sense of community. Why is it that the Miamians don't get a reservation or don't have one here?
Well, with various treaties that were signed in the 18th and mostly the 19th century, earlier part of the 19th century, there were reserved lands.
Okay.
They weren't called reservations, but it was reserved lands if you go back and look at those treaties. So they're actually, if you want to look at it today's thinking, there were reservations here. They were reserved lands for individual families. But part of the community is out in Oklahoma because they were forcibly removed, and but Oklahoma has its unique situation with Native Americans. They don't technically have reservations either. There's so much, and that's why I always say history matters to why things are the way they are today.
Right.
And words matter.
Absolutely. I am an advocate of absolutely, because I was talking to someone and she says to me, well, you're taking my words literally. And I said, well, that's what I should do. You're saying it.
Right.
So, yeah. But I also think that if you really think about the time that we're in, really being a cultural anthropologist and understanding and observing and understanding and looking at it through human nature and how interaction is really very poignant, and because of this whole idea of wanting to create cultural awareness. I mean, that's part of what an anthropologist you're doing is to study. And also the other thing I thought was very interesting when you talk about history. So I had Dr. Jeff Webb, who's a history professor from Huntington University, and I had him on, and we were talking about, because I was talking about how we're trying to rewrite our history, and he said to me that there's a difference between heritage and history. And what we're trying to do is change the American heritage, like how we see ourselves in pride. And so I thought that was really interesting. But so I think that your work is very relevant. And so one of the things I was telling you before we started was, in my due diligence, I went to your website, and on the front page you have a very nice photo of you, and you actually have 3 quotations. And I actually sort of looked at those, and I thought, this is a great way to sort of navigate this conversation. So I'm going to start with the first one, and then we'll see where we go.
Okay.
So the first one was from a very well-known cultural anthropologist, Margaret Mead. And she said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So
that just gave me goosebumps. Every time I hear it or read it myself, it's so inspiring to me.
Well, and I think it also leads to the fact of how what you studied is so relevant to what you do today, because the truth is that you describe yourself as a change maker and working, and that you've been in service to others for 30 years, both as a professor and nonprofit work. And so in terms of where you are now, at Wellspring, Interfaith Social Services. So let's talk a little bit about what Wellspring is, and then we'll talk about sort of how you got there and how your background sort of.
Sure. We've been actually in this neighborhood for over 50 years, and so we do a lot of youth programming that's focused on the central city, but also in other areas, from other areas of Fort Wayne. We have an after-school program. We've had a youth summer day camp. We have an older adult program, and then we have a free clothing boutique. And then we received a lot of media attention for this, but we have a very successful food operation, both a food bank on site and a mobile food pantry that made us an essential workers throughout this pandemic.
So, and even more critical.
We've helped a lot of people.
But here's also a perfect example of how you're looking at and observing people. So when you were creating your, where the mobile food banks would go, and you were going into the Burmese community, you noticed that they weren't taking certain foods and items that you offered, and you sort of questioned, like, why? And you
actually, we didn't even get it that far, Sarah. I'm going to interrupt you. I did my research, because I'm a researcher. I did that in advance because I didn't want to give them food that's going to end up in a landfill, because they don't eat it.
Right.
So I did my due diligence ahead of time, and we found out that no matter what ethnic group from Myanmar or Burma, they will all eat fish. So that's what we take. We take fish, rice, beans, and produce. So, but I have heard, like what you were describing, I've heard others say that about various ethnic groups. Like, we took this food and they didn't want that. Well, you didn't do your due diligence.
Right. But that's also, I think, because you are someone who studies and researches.
Very sensitive to it.
It's very sensitive.
Yeah.
But you're also very sensitive in looking at, serving these communities. And the fact is that even before COVID, we were in a food crisis. I mean, with the idea of food insecurity and food deserts. And we'll talk about that. But, when you are in the service of others and people have needs and struggles, I think that you also, because you had that in your personal life. I mean, granted, you had your education, so you had that, but that didn't preclude you from having difficulties, and even this idea of the working poor and being able to make a living wage.
Right.
So you relied on food banks and programs for to help your family, and you lived in subsidized housing. So first of all, you debunked the myth of who people think need these services, because it's not who they think, and also it's at different times in your life and when you need them. And certainly now with COVID, we're seeing a lot of people need them, because it's not who we like, some populations that we particularly see, but it's people who were living paycheck to paycheck, but you take away that paycheck. So I think that, how do you think that helps you, and to give you that, what they call that EQ, that, empathy, and how does that help you?
It definitely, making that transition from academia to the nonprofit world, I knew that was a calling for me, and then experiencing hard times myself. Like you said, having, and I'm very privileged to have the education that I do. I never take that for granted.
Right, because you're less than, 2% have PhD. So let's,
But if the hard times, if that fell on my daughter and I, just a little over 2 years ago, can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. So in the food programming we have, or any of the clients that we serve, because most are, at the poverty line or below, that there is this. I don't ever pretend to know that I understand what they're going through. But we all don't come out of life unscathed. We all have trauma to deal with, but it does inform the empathy that I have. But I was raised in a home where empathy, my dad was always the person rooting for the underdog and everything, and I didn't really come to appreciate that until the last couple of years. And I know that's where I learned that from.
And I love the idea that you refer to yourself as an accidental activist. Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, I think the onus is on us. We live in a normal pre-COVID world, in a beautiful democracy, and I think we should all be civically engaged. That goes back to that Margaret Mead quote. I think the onus is on all of us to reap the rewards of this democracy, to vote, to be civically engaged, and to stand up for issues or groups of people that really motivate you. And I'm not the type of person that's going to go to a protest or to march. That's just not how I work. But I think it's lovely that we have the right to do that. And I have a lot of friends who, and sometimes they're surprised, why aren't you coming down? I prefer to work in the background. And in the foreground when I need to.
Okay.
Right. Yep. And speak, but I just do it differently. Right. And that's what I've been, especially with all the different forums, given all the unrest we've had this year, even like on social media, I'll just say, just recognize there are different ways to advocate or to be that activist. Okay. I've never really honestly thought of myself as an activist, but I am very vocal about when it comes to food insecurity and to helping people where they're at. This pandemic it's just, our numbers in our food programming this last month, Sarah, were the highest they've been all year. And those of us working in the food insecurity world, our food banks are thinning a little. Right. And we're just starting to see the economic fallout from this pandemic. And I knew that going into it because of my training and my background. I can look at a whole system and think, oh boy, how's this all going to affect, especially the people that I serve? Right.
Well, because think about it. So in 2018, 51,000 Allen County residents, so 14.3% of the county's population, had faced food insecurity, and that was based on the vulnerable population study. And of that 51,000, 18,000 are children. So can you imagine that we took away where they got at least 2 meals a day, and because they don't go to school, so they don't have the free lunch. And in Fort Wayne Community Schools, they made it that the entire system, everybody gets free lunch and breakfast. So we have that problem, and so we're not even know where they are in it, and let alone that even before COVID, how many kids went to school, and then when they're going to eat on the weekends. And so we have that problem. And so I think, that creates the problem. But also, when you look at the difference between food insecurity and food deserts. So food insecurity is when people don't know where they're next. And you really also see that the tremendous growth is with senior citizens. Because what they have found is that 5 to 9%, so this is again in the study for 2018, of seniors who have food insecurity. But nationwide, it has more than doubled since 2001. So this issue, and also because of the issues not only of not having the means to get literally the money, but they don't have the means to get to the food. And so, I mean, that's going to continuing to be a big issue.
And we see that in our food programming. 13 to 15% of those we serve are seniors, 20% between both food programs are disabled. And those numbers just in my tenure there as executive director have gone up a lot. And I think for the next 6 months, we're going to see numbers we've never seen before.
And you also talked about that college students is a fast growing. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing there.
I attended a forum at IPFW, PFW,
right.
Several months ago, about, they have a food pantry there, and just listening to the issues that students were facing, and having been in higher ed myself for really the bulk of my career, I wanted to find out what other schools were doing in this community. And then I got connected with someone at Indiana Tech. I think it was a God wink moment that made that happen. And found out that they have wanted a food pantry for a long time, but never knew how to do it. And I said, well, we can make that easy for you. We can bring our van once a month. We'll take care of all the sweat equity, and we'll distribute food. So yeah, we did receive some nice press attention for that. And we did serve a lot of students. But then COVID happened,
right.
and a lot of them went home.
Right, or they're still here, but they don't have
very
a means.
few were still
right.
on campus,
okay.
but there were some. But still people from the neighborhood
right.
come, and we will have a commitment there until the end of the year. But I'm already thinking about in 2021 what parts of the city we're going to go to. Food insecurity is everywhere.
Right.
Even though food desert maps don't always necessarily, they don't encapsulate where the need is. It couldn't, because it'd probably be all colored.
Right.
Right. But there is a need out northwest. There is a need in some parts of southwest.
It's the same that hunger and food insecurity doesn't discriminate. I mean, it's everybody. And it's sort of like what amazed me, and I really didn't think about this until we were researching that, another of the senior citizens, one of the fastest growing groups of those are grandparents, because of the drug epidemics and other situations and incarceration, that here you have grandparents who are on fixed incomes, and now they are taking in their grandchildren, and they don't get any assistance for that. So now on this fixed income, they now have to feed 4 more mouths that they didn't account for.
Right.
So they are actually a very significant group. And I didn't, you don't think about that. It's sort of like the ripple effect. But the idea, so that food insecurity is the idea that people don't necessarily know where their next meal is coming from.
Right.
Okay. But a food desert it's very interesting, because you're right. If you did it on a map, it's sort of what it makes sense, because it says that the poverty rate has to be 20% or greater, with the median income below 80% of the average family income. So basically what they're saying is the threshold, which is unbelievable for a family of 4, is an income below $25,000. So can you imagine just if you had to pay your rent and childcare and, it's that working poor. So it's even part of the issue is that when you look at these programs and things that you do, not only is it doesn't discriminate, but these aren't people who don't have jobs, but we're not paying people enough to have a living wage.
Right.
And when you have to make a choice, and so then the other issue is that also, so you have to have the people living below the poverty level, 20%, and then you also it has to be within an area, in an urban area, where you're living more than a half a mile from a grocery store.
A full service.
A full service, right. And full service grocery stores, because, when people start talking about getting one in downtown Fort Wayne, what they don't realize is, Kroger and they're in a business. So they need to know that in order to put a store, they're going to have at least access to 250,000 people. And so if they don't have that, they're not coming. So you have that on top of it. So, and then in Allen County, they've identified 37 areas that are what they would call these food deserts. So, and that's talking about nearly 110,000. And I can only imagine
half our population.
Yeah, that's half our population. And so, tell me a little bit about what Wellspring. You talked about the mobile, and you have 3 vans now, right?
Well, technically 4.
Oh, okay.
But we have, what's really exciting, we're purchasing a cargo van that is dedicated exclusively, because we use those vans for all kinds of things. Transporting children for our after-school program, we're going to have a van dedicated full-time to our mobile food programming. So we're really excited about that. To buy a vehicle with all of this going on.
Right.
The community has been very good to us as far as donations, and foundations have been really good for nonprofits too. But we're several months out now, and a lot of us have gone through some of those emergency dollars. So we've been talking about what is 2021 going to look like. We're not going to be in a position probably to buy a van, so how do we still serve the people and the growing need that we know we're going to see in those food lines?
And the issue isn't really because the property tax income and all the taxes, it's not for 2021 where we're going to have the problem, because we're a year ahead. It's what we collect now is going to impact the budgets for 2022, and that's when we're going to feel it. So, but one of the questions I had for you, and I have this because it's also an issue I have with about where city government and the should be in their role in these services, like with the homeless and with food. And it just seems to me that in these kind of areas, it's always a faith-based organization, or like with you, I know you work with associated churches, or the homeless shelters. And I want to know, why is that, and why don't you think that there should be like city departments that work alongside, like, and a lot of times what I'm so surprised, they have that this booklet that they give that says, don't give them change, you give them this booklet and it tells them where they can go to get services. So the city is promoting all of these religious affiliated organizations. So what do you think about that? And do you think that the city's not stepping up, or?
I know in other communities, cities do have active councils for food, for housing, and homelessness and whatnot. And I don't know exactly why that hasn't happened here. I do know with the history of Fort Wayne, again, history matters, that, we've long been known as the city of churches. And it was the churches who were the original social workers. And a lot of people don't realize that. Before social work was even called social work, they were teaching immigrants how to speak English or German, whatever the language was here at the time. They were schooling them, they were churching them, and things like that. And I think that's the legacy that continues into today's world. We are the boots on the ground. So the homeless, I call them the Homeless Coalition. That's not their technical title, but that is largely faith-based. And I'm on that council.
The Rescue Mission, and Vincent Village. They're all, and so. So I was just curious. But so now this is a perfect. You just gave me my segue to quotation number 2.
Okay.
Do what you can with what you have and where you're at, and that was Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes.
So let's look at your work as a community advocate and the whole idea about immigration and immigrants and welcoming Fort Wayne.
Okay.
So tell me a little bit about that and how you sort of looked at where you were. This is what we have to do, and to do it.
Well, and I'm going to actually make it, my response is going to be in part broader.
Okay.
Is people feel powerless, or that they don't have a voice beyond voting. And this goes back to what we were talking about before, the activism or the advocacy. Everyone has a talent, and everyone can give or help a cause or a person, even if it's paying it forward with someone, helping someone across the street. This right now, with everything that's going on in the world, not just even in this country, in the world, that we can all help someone else. And that's why that quote speaks to me. It's, you don't have to be wealthy to help out at a food bank. You don't have to offer your extra guest bedroom for someone who's homeless, but you can help them in other ways, or you help an organization that helps them.
Or it's being aware, like for instance, that now that we're going into fall, we don't have the abundance of fresh fruits and vegetables. So now we need canned goods. So, everybody has those cans, whatever in their cupboard that they don't use. So that's, being aware and knowing that that's what now food banks need. So, you can step up and do that. So it's also having awareness of where you're at and, being, but the fact of the matter is that especially in the times that we are living now, there is a huge issue with the anti-immigration rhetoric and with immigrants and understanding really what they are. And even, earlier this week, end of last week, the government changed the whole H-1 visa program. And, and it doesn't really make sense what they're doing in terms of how they're changing it. They're saying it's because they don't want foreign workers to take jobs from American workers who the companies can then pay these foreign workers less. But it's actually, the HB1 visa program was actually because these were skills. These are technical jobs, and most of it is really hurting India, that we don't have enough people who are educated enough.
To fill those jobs.
So, and the other thing that people, when you look at the whole economics of immigration is, and you look at how with food insecurity, is the problem that a lot of immigrants, the migrants, they do jobs that Americans don't want to do. So the amount of food that went to waste during this fall harvest, because the farms didn't have anyone to pick it, to gather it. So it's even, you talk about food insecurity and the problem, but it's all impacted. So, but let's talk a little bit about, because the idea is that there are, according to, in 2020, according to Pew, there are more than 40 million immigrants living in the U.S. So let's talk about...
Highest number ever.
Yeah, right, it is. And truthfully, if it wasn't for immigrant populations, this is the first time in the history of the country that we are not replacing our population. We are negative and the repercussions of that is not only do we not have a future workforce, but we don't have people paying into the Social Security to take care of the elderly. So, but it's the immigration populations that is helping to fuel that and keep our numbers up. And also a great many of that is because Hispanic and Latinos do have larger families, because most people in the US are even looking at, it's an economic decision how many children they have, because they look at it. And that's why they were saying, like during the COVID, I was banking on 9 months, we're gonna have this baby boom. No, I mean, people do not, they know they can't afford it. So there really isn't going to be. So, I mean, people don't realize that, all the ways that what immigrants do and they provide. So let's talk about how you started and were involved with creating this Welcoming Fort Wayne to bring that awareness.
Sure. Well, I think of it as the local chapter of the larger nonprofit called Welcoming America. And that started less than a decade ago. To just raise awareness about, like what you just said beautifully, how much immigrants contribute to American culture and the economy and whatnot. And so that perhaps when future edicts from government are made, that they'll be premised upon well-informed data and trends and whatnot. And I don't mean just even quantitative data. I mean the data from folks like me, from social scientists who understand the impact of these things. So there was a handful of us that looked at the welcoming chapter, if you will, in Indianapolis a handful of years ago, and then came back, and Roger Reese, executive pastor at Associated Churches, was like, okay, Melissa, you can run with this and do what you want to do. So, so it's been very much a volunteer effort. If it could be my full-time job, I could have accomplished a lot more. But we have worked behind the scenes, because that's how I prefer to do it. We've had the Welcoming Fort Wayne Diversity Awards the last 2 years at PFW. We had a very successful yard sign campaign 3 years ago, which I'm excited to say that we have some more in production.
Those are the stickers that
says, well, the stickers and yard signs that says that say you are welcome here in the 4 most spoken languages in Fort Wayne. English, Spanish, Burmese, and French. Yeah. So, no, I'm sorry, not French. Arabic.
Arabic. Okay.
Arabic, yep. It was French, and now it's Arabic. So I'm excited, and that was at Roger's request. He's like, we need this. We need to bring neighbors together, because that's really what it is.
We need to fight the general rhetoric that's happening. But let's step back again to prove how your work, and why I'm really also stressing this is because my belief in liberal arts and the importance of liberal arts and how it appeals to any job you do, is talk about that for Fort Wayne. The history of Fort Wayne is, it is a city of immigrants, and not granted the country, but let's talk about with Fort Wayne that our past and present, it's all connected to the immigrants, from the Germans and then the French for the traders, and then you had like you're a third generation immigrant from Belgium, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I mean, tell me a little bit about how really that for the city today, we wouldn't have the economic vitality if we, or the cultural vibrancy, if we didn't, it was built on immigrants.
and I'll add to that on indigenous land.
Okay, all right.
Because I always be a champion for indigenous rights.
So when you mean that, you mean that they're
blind.
Well, I don't technically consider them immigrants because they were here.
They're not. That's what I'm saying. Is that immigrants came and added to a community that was already here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we could talk about, which is the whole issue
whole
about
issue,
with the U.S. and taking land and.
Yes. I mean, Fort Wayne is what it is today because it was built on the backs, ideologically and physically, of immigrants. And too, I'll add the Irish. I'm part Irish too, and they came here and helped build the canals.
Right.
Many different, and my last name, I am a proud Belgian, but I'm also very Rinehart. You can't get much more German than that, right?
From the Rhine.
Right, from the Rhine. So
your family probably liked wine.
Maybe, I don't know. So apparently we have a castle somewhere, but I don't know.
Well,
if that's true.
Reinhardt. Well, because in Germany, your last names are traditionally based on your occupations, and the Rhine, is where the Moselle. That's German wine country. So there's probably somewhere in that beautiful
and that's
area.
interesting because I don't care for wine very much. So
well, I didn't say you developed a palate for it, but
and again. History, I can't believe this is what I keep saying throughout this conversation, but history is so relevant to why things are the way they are nationally, but also here in this community. It's going to continue that faith-based organizations and nonprofits alike are going to step up and help people when other entities don't.
Right. Well, and it's also how we got such a large Burmese population because Catholic Charities was serving as the you needed a sponsor or something like that. So that's how we built the Burmese. Sure. So they absolutely do, the faith-based, and then you also look at Bridges of Grace and how they're helping some of the Hispanic and growth. So
they're doing great work.
So, but if you look at it, this is based on the New American study that was in Fort Wayne that you were involved in, and you were looking at the demographic and economic contributions of immigrants. So this was based in 2016. So in 2016, 4.5% of our region's population are immigrants. So you're talking over 28,000, and you absolutely. When we were talking about population growth. So 24.7% of that population growth in our community is attributed to immigrants. And the other thing that I thought that what people don't realize is, and part of it's the rhetoric, on a national, and you made mention of this idea that a lot of your work, which actually goes to your third quote, is this idea that things that you do on the community level are not necessarily reflective of what's happening on the national level. So I'm going to read the quote because then we can weave it in. But you said, without ethics, democracy cannot survive. Integrity is central to both moral and ethical leadership. The character of our citizenry and the character of our leadership determine how strong we are as a nation. We must hold ourselves and public officials to ethical standards that preserve and protect democracy. And that was from Jill Long Thompson, a former congresswoman in the U.S. House, and she's a professor of ethics at Indiana University. So in part, they always say if you really want to know the true bellwether of a society is look at how they take care of their indigent, those less fortunate. I mean, that will tell you more than anything. So really these two ideas are very timely right now because we're facing these issues. So, I mean, how do you think that Fort Wayne is doing? Because we have a history of this, and because this idea that community are more of a reflection, and that's why also during the beginning of the election cycle for 2020, why mayors were getting a lot of attention because people felt that mayors were having impact where nothing was getting done on a federal level. So how do you think we're doing? Are we welcoming? Do you think that we are reflecting to protecting our democracy? And
I think, from when Welcoming Fort Wayne started and the little bit I've tried to do here and there and in partnership with others.
It's more than a little bit here and there.
Well, but yes, I think we are more welcoming, But, you know, for us to be an official certified welcoming city, there needs to be a visible presence in city government. And we don't have that, and a lot of cities don't.
Right. But we are
Some
making
do.
progress.
We are making progress. Dayton is the closest city that's similar in size and capacity that does have a formal presence, and they have a hugely successful welcoming effort there. What was the other part of the question? Oh, well, you know, and everything I do, whether it's the welcoming work or working at Wellspring or any kind of advocacy work that I do, and we all do this differently, but I do it, I feel like I'm morally informed. I do my research. I trust my gut and my heart. I talk to people. So when I say research, I mean, yeah, I read things. I observe, but I talk to people too.
But that's being a cultural anthropologist.
Right. Well, that's being a critical thinker, though.
But that's part of my argument of why liberal arts is so important.
It's very important.
And why these skills, like if, you know, it's like when people say they want to be a philosophy, well, what job are you going to get? I'm sure that your parents thought, you're going to get a PhD in, what are you going to do? You know,
yeah, I heard that.
And and so partly why I keep pushing this is because I want people to understand that there's so much you could do with it. And
it's unlimited.
Right. And I think also it does put you in that place of wanting to be a servant and wanting to lead, to help others, because you know, and talk about having an impact on the community level is you did run you ran for office of the township trustee in 2018 for Perry Township, and you lost, and there was a lot of issues there. But what did you learn, especially about being, now in that case, you are a minority because you were a woman running, and
the first woman ever there,
right?
In that township.
And also this idea of really why you were so interested in township government is that people don't realize it is that first defense, and it is that boots on the ground government, and it is the stop measure sort of to help people before they have to go to Wellspring or lose their homes and things like that.
Right.
So what did you learn as being an outsider and in that role? And
well, you know, I had worked with township trustees before when I first stepped into nonprofit work years ago. And so I know from personal experience when working with clients how important they are. Like you said, they're boots on the ground, you know, and this is often the argument I have when people say they don't want to vote especially at the national level because they don't think that vote's going to matter. Votes do matter, and especially with local government.
How many did you lose by?
I lost by quite a bit.
But still, it was, but the point is that
I have no regrets at all.
But the point is that, especially on the local level, a vote can make the difference.
One vote can make a huge difference. And, you know, I had a lot of crossover votes, and I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, you had a lot. And you had one guy, I heard, he was a very staunch Republican, and he, does not cross party lines, but he did for you.
You did do your research.
Of course. You know, you're a cultural anthropologist. I'm a journalist, you know. Yeah. I gotta prepare for my conversation
Yeah,
here.
You absolutely did. I had no doubts. Yeah, you know, I ran for an office that I believe in because, you know, and as we were saying earlier, when I was running for that office, that is when I had just left subsidized housing, purchased a home, and then I lost my job a month later.
Right. And you and I actually, that's when we first met.
Is that when we first met?
And I told you that you were going to find something. I had no doubt.
Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. But it was ironic, humbling, and really ironic that I was running for an office that I may have needed services from.
And a lot of people actually don't understand what township government is, and so, but for some people during this COVID, like the Wayne Township, I mean, they would help you if
they're busy,
right? Because they're helping people if they need rent, or because now the moratorium on for your electricity and stuff. So and that's the whole idea of what the township government is.
Absolutely.
It's sort of like how I sort of think of it is when everybody knew their neighbors, and you know, some neighbor was having a tough time, and so everybody would come together and sort of give them a little leg up and stuff. That's what it is. But most people don't even realize that it is the simplest and most critical form of government.
People who've never needed to use it don't know about it. But the folks that I've worked with for years or advocated for, they know what the township trustees do for them.
And do you think that a lot of people who don't understand or realize about the value that immigrants play is because they're just not around them? I mean, or they don't?
I think there's a lot to that. You know, I don't have any data off the top of my head to support that, but I do. You know, people, like attracts like. And if you're not someone like yourself or me that are always looking for something different and new, whether it's food or a person or who you're going to hang out with, you know, on a Saturday night, you know, people go where they feel comfortable. I like feeling uncomfortable. Sometimes,
but
you know,
but we're okay with being not expecting. Like when you go to a Chinese restaurant, you know you're not going to get a hamburger there. You know what you're going to get. Or if you're going to go to an Ethiopian restaurant, we're okay with this diversity and difference in our food, but we're not necessarily okay with it in our communities. And I think that too often we don't realize, like some of the things I was really surprised about when you think about immigrants, and it's so contrary, is that in Allen County, so on a federal contribution to social programs, they pay $65.7 million to Social Security. They pay, this is 2016, they paid $104 million to federal taxes and 56 to state and local. And then actually, they also, that because of the fact that 77.6% of the workers in manufacturing here are immigrants, and that actually that year they created and were able to help keep immigrants over 1,200 jobs in our region. And so I think that people just don't realize that. And one of the things also that I really wanted to, which I thought was really interesting, so in 2016, 61% of immigrants own their own homes, compared to 69.2% of U.S. born. So when we think about these, and also what also has been very interesting, if you look in the last 5 years, the Burmese community in Fort Wayne has far exceeded the African American and Black community with home ownership. And I think partly it's also because of their community, but I don't think people realize that they're looking to own a home and to contribute. It's not like what the perception is, oh, they're just here to take. No, they want a better life. That means they want to work for that life.
And they're investing.
Right.
To make
and
that
also,
happen. What
also surprised me, so for entrepreneurs in 2012, so to the contributions to our local, tax base and revenue, okay? So African American sales revenue of African-owned and Black-owned businesses, $397 million. Asian, $603 million, and Hispanics, $112 million. That's business ownership. So not only when people think, oh, they're taking our jobs, no, they're actually creating jobs. And I think that that's the kind of thing that people just don't realize, and that they sort of live within these stereotypes, just like we talked about who needs help, and when somebody needs a leg up, it could be anybody.
And, I've shared some of that data at various talks and presentations and panels I've sat on, but the data doesn't move people like you think it would. It's really
the stories.
It's the stories. It's the you helped this person out in the grocery store who didn't speak English, and it changed your worldview about that person, or the stereotype you had about that person or that group of people.
But it's even the stereotypes that people have about Southeast Fort Wayne. I mean, because I drove around. I still don't know where I am, and I don't look at it in quadrants. So I'm driving around, and I don't know, and I'm thinking, oh, that's a really nice house, and that's a cute house, and then people say, oh, that's the Southeast, and I'm like, oh, that's really nice, and they're like, that's, and I said, okay. You have not been, if you want to see the south side of Chicago, where it looks out like bombed out Beirut, that to me, all these neighborhoods I'm driving, I think these are all wonderful neighborhoods. The houses, there's no, houses, there's no boarded up houses, there were kids' bikes everywhere. I'm thinking, I would love to live in any of these neighborhoods. So again, it's also, yes, it is where you come from, but I think that people just need to get out of that sort of myopic view. And so one of the things that you, have this idea of is about this unified civic commitment to refugee integration in Fort Wayne. What does that mean to you?
Well, and I think I alluded to this earlier. It'd be nice to have more of a civic presence that not only, it acknowledges the immigrant and refugee contributions today, but I think having more of a civic dedication to it is also honoring the heritage of this community. And I think that's been muted because of the rhetoric, like you were saying.
And do you think it's also because of the limitations of language barrier?
In what way?
Like because in a civic, so like if they, sometimes they may not understand, sort of be like, maybe to be able to give a speech, to have a, to run for a voice, to run for office, and maybe they're not going to, sometimes language.
I was thinking of it on the other side of the table.
Okay.
Yeah, and I could have said that more clearly. I think if there was more of an administrative oversight, that it wouldn't fix the gaps, but it would centralize the ways we can help support and welcome immigrants and refugees, and not it be just another government department or what have you, but to also have a place at the table for faith-based organizations, for the Welcoming Fort Wayne, for nonprofits. I'm always going to say we can do more together.
Right, right, and you, and so you also, your idea that, so this is a little weighted question, but
if the others have.
Well, but you say that you mentioned we were at a call on Saturday, and you talked in the message you put, you need to keep your voice relevant, and you also mentioned at the during your concession speech that you ended it with, you haven't heard the last from Team Rinehart, not even close. So it begs the question, with 2023, the elections and coming up, and needing to keep your voice relevant, and you've had this experience, do you think you would run again for public office?
Yes, I will run again.
But you're not going to tell us what?
I don't know yet. I'd like to see how the census impacts districting.
Right, and people don't realize that that's really about how many, but I think that you're right, that it is critical to keep your voice relevant, but also to have a voice, and also to help those who may not be as eloquent to give them a voice and a chance. And so I think that you really demonstrate that.
Well, thank you. I think, as a cultural anthropologist holding office someday, why not? I mean, I'm a critical thinker. I'm a huge advocate for my community that I love, and for so many issues and groups.
Well, think about it. You also are able to you read and analyze and see both sides.
Sure, absolutely.
You're able to question. You're able to bring together cohesive and build consensus.
Absolutely.
You're also, because of as a cultural anthropologist, you understand how certain words or certain actions are not taken the same way. Just like with, people don't understand the Burmese community, why they like to paint their houses different colors, or a lot of them didn't understand about garbage pickup because they never had that before. It's not that they want to not intentionally take care of their lawn, they just don't know.
Sure.
So I think that you're very critical to that in our community, and yes, I think your voice is still very relevant.
I think we need to see more women in office too.
Yes, I agree.
1 out of 5 is not. I had a friend of mine ask a couple of years ago, when will it be enough for women? And I said, when there's not 1 in 5 at the table that's only a woman.
Right. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, how many women should be on the Supreme Court? She said 9, because women are 51% of the population. So shouldn't we be in the majority in every office? So I'm sticking with Ruth on that one. And I love the phrase, you can't have truth without Ruth. That was from the RBG. Yeah. So, no, but I agree with you. Women have to, but it's also, it's this whole issue of women need to know they have a voice. Stop worrying about finding your voice. Just use it and make sure it's relevant. So I think you're a real testament to that.
Thank you.
So at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. And he believed that by answering these questions, you're going to reveal even more about your true...
12 of them?
Yeah, there's 12, but they go fast.
Okay.
What is your favorite word?
Oh my gosh, duplicitous. I use it every day in some form or fashion. My friends all crack up over it.
All right. Well, at least it's not irregardless, which isn't a word. So,
right.
All right. That would be my least favorite word. What is your least favorite word?
Race.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
People who think outside the box.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Myopic thinkers.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love birdsong.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Sirens makes me sad.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
That I haven't done?
Right.
Always wondered what it would have been like if I'd become a physician or some kind of medical practitioner. Like in another country,
Right.
Doctors Without Borders
Right.
or something, you know.
What profession would you not like to do?
My grandfather was a grave digger, and that is not something I would like. But I'm very proud that he did that because he did what he had to put food on the table.
Right. And your grandfather really did that. And your father did too, in a sense, right? Or he was able to establish more business.
Well, my father was a teacher. Yeah.
So your parents were the first college educated, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you consider your greatest achievement?
My daughter.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
I'm going to pick the cop out, Margaret Mead.
Well, I would expect that. You know, she is the
There are many
matriarch
other-
of cultural anthropology.
But there are many other anthropologists and historical figures I would like to
But
meet.
she was really one of the first
She gave women a voice in the field. She was controversial, though. I mean, those would be some interesting conversations.
How would you like to die?
With my daughter at my side.
If heaven exists, or you, because your faith, heaven exists. I got corrected in another interview, but heaven exists. What would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Thank you for making a difference in some people's lives.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you
That was 12?
That was 12, I told you.
It went fast.
So
okay.
I want to thank you for sharing your voice at this
Thank
table.
you for having me.
And I do hope that you'll come back because we have lots more to talk about.
We certainly
especially
can.
as you start to navigate your way, and also through what for 2023, but also how to find our way through with COVID and your efforts for being a more welcoming community here. So I thank you. And you can join me next time when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.